The intelligence officer sitting 3 tables away from you in that cafe wasn't caught because of a hidden camera, a misplaced document, or a failed dead drop. They weren't undone by encryption failures or intercepted communications. They were identified, tracked, and eventually compromised because of something far more fundamental, something that happens in the space between heartbeats, in the micro decisions we make without thinking. The mistake that ends careers and sometimes lives in the intelligence world isn't cinematic. It doesn't involve car chases or shootouts. It happens in grocery stores, on subway platforms, in hotel lobbies. It happens when a trained operative, someone who has spent years learning to disappear, makes the one error that ordinary people make every single day without consequence. But for them, in that moment, it becomes fatal. Public spaces represent the greatest operational paradox in modern intelligence work. They offer the perfect cover of crowds, the anonymity of strangers moving through shared routines, the background noise that can conceal a conversation or obscure a surveillance detection route. Yet these same environments create a theater of constant, invisible observation. Every security camera, every bored commuter, every shopkeeper with nothing to do becomes a potential witness. The challenge isn't simply being present in public. It's being present in exactly the right way, moving through space with the unconscious authenticity that marks someone who belongs. Intelligence officers train for years to master this presence, yet the human mind works against them in ways that no amount of preparation can fully override. The psychology of blending in requires understanding something most people never consciously consider. When you walk into your regular coffee shop, your body language reflects a complex web of familiarity, routine, and unconscious comfort. You know where to stand, how long the line usually takes, which barista is working today. Your eyes move in predictable patterns because you've made these movements dozens of times before. Your stress level remains baseline because nothing here represents a threat or an anomaly. Now imagine being a foreign intelligence officer, entering that same space for the first time knowing that in 40 seconds, you need to make a brush pass with an asset you've never met, while 3 counter-surveillance teams are potentially observing from multiple angles and your diplomatic cover would evaporate under serious scrutiny. Your task is to look exactly like someone who comes here every Tuesday morning, without a care in the world. The tension lies in that gap between what the mind knows and what the body reveals. Surveillance experts don't look for people acting suspicious. They look for people acting like they're trying not to be suspicious. They watch for the tiny corrections, the overcalculated movements, the eyes that skim just a fraction too deliberately. A trained operative knows they shouldn't check their surroundings too often, so they might check too rarely, creating an unnatural stillness that stands out against the casual awareness of genuine customers. They know they should appear relaxed, so they force their shoulders down and slow their breathing, producing a manufactured calm that looks different from authentic ease. The mistake isn't being nervous, it's being too controlled. What ultimately betrays intelligence? Officers in public settings isn't a single dramatic error, but an accumulation of tiny deviations from baseline human behavior. Consider how people interact with technology in public spaces. An ordinary person checks their phone with thoughtless, almost compulsive regularity, their attention fragmenting between screens and surroundings in unpredictable bursts. They might glance at a notification, ignore it, then check again 30 seconds later for no logical reason. An operative trying to appear normal might check their phone at what seems like reasonable intervals, but those intervals follow a pattern, a rhythm that reveals the checking is purposeful rather than habitual. Or they might avoid their phone entirely when a natural civilian in that demographic and context would be buried in it. Both approaches create ripples in the expected texture of public behavior. The fatal mistake often involves what psychologists call cognitive load, when someone is managing multiple layers of deception, while simultaneously navigating a physical environment, executing operational tasks, and monitoring for threats. Their brain reaches capacity. Under cognitive load, people revert to deeply ingrained patterns, and for intelligence officers, These patterns often come from training rather than authentic civilian life. An operative might navigate a crowded train platform with the precise spatial awareness of someone with tactical training, maintaining clear sight lines and keeping their back protected, moving through crowds with an efficiency that feels wrong. A normal commuter bumbles, gets stuck behind slow walkers, makes inefficient choices because they're thinking about dinner or a text message, not about fields of fire and escape routes. The environment itself creates constant tests of authenticity. A tourist taking photos in a public square can spend minutes fumbling with a camera, blocking foot traffic, asking strangers for help with settings. An intelligence officer conducting surveillance under tourist cover might photograph the same locations but with practiced efficiency. Their movements showing a purpose that contradicts the wandering aimlessness of genuine tourism. They know what they want to photograph and why, and that knowledge shapes how they move, even when they're consciously trying to waste time and appear casual. The disconnect between intent and performance becomes visible to trained observers who understand what they're looking for. Time perception creates another dimension of exposure. Under operational stress, minutes feel different. An officer waiting for a contact might experience time dilation, where 30 seconds of waiting feels like several minutes, causing them to check their watch or phone more frequently than someone casually waiting would. Or they might do the opposite, remaining to patient, showing a tolerance for dead time that feels unnatural in a culture of constant stimulation. The way someone inhabits time reveals their internal state. And internal states under operational pressure rarely match the baseline emotional landscape of civilian public life. The most sophisticated surveillance operations don't focus on catching spies in the act of espionage. They focus on identifying individuals whose public behavior contains these microscopic inconsistencies, then tracking them over time until patterns emerge. A person who seems just slightly too aware in a shopping mall, whose eyes move with tactical precision rather than consumer distraction, who navigates crowds with purposeful efficiency rather than civilian chaos, someone whose baseline in public spaces suggests training, intention, and control where there should be thoughtlessness, routine, and mild chaos. The mistake isn't obvious, it's cumulative. It builds across observations until a profile emerges of someone who doesn't quite fit, who occupies public space like someone playing a role rather than someone simply being. What makes this mistake so dangerous is that the operative rarely knows when it's happening. There's no alarm, no clear moment of compromise. They execute their task, they leave, they report success. Meanwhile, somewhere in the machinery of hostile counterintelligence, analysts are reviewing footage, comparing behavioral patterns, building cases. The consequence of the mistake doesn't arrive for weeks, sometimes months, but it arrives. Because in the architecture of modern surveillance, public spaces aren't anonymous anymore. They're documented, analyzed, and cross-referenced. And the one error that keeps repeating across every environment, every culture, every operation, is still unfolding. The worst part isn't that the mistake is inevitable. It's that even knowing exactly what goes wrong, even understanding the mechanism of exposure, the human mind and body struggle to perform perfect authenticity under pressure. The real question isn't whether spies make this mistake, it's whether anyone can consistently avoid it when the stakes are absolute and the scrutiny is invisible. The mistake is already in progress by the time the operative realizes something feels wrong. Perhaps it's the third time passing the same corner in a commercial district, or the moment when entering a department store feels less like shopping and more like executing a predetermined route. The error isn't in the action itself, but in the residue it leaves in the pattern of movement, the rhythm of presence. A civilian shopping moves with organic randomness, doubling back when they forget something, lingering too long at displays that catch their eye, making inefficient choices driven by impulse and distraction. The intelligence officer moves with a hidden purpose, and purpose creates geometry, even when they build in randomness. That randomness follows rules, even when they waste time. The wasted time serves a function. The difference is nearly invisible, in a single moment, but across the span of an hour. Across multiple locations, the pattern emerges like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Crowds create the illusion of invisibility while actually amplifying every deviation from normal behavior. In a busy train station, a person who belongs moves with the herd instinct of commuters, following unspoken social choreography. They position themselves where others position themselves. They check the departure board with the same frequency and duration as surrounding travelers. They respond to announcements and delays with visible frustration or resignation. An operative in the same space might mirror these behaviors consciously, but conscious mirroring produces a delay, a fractional lag between stimulus and response that creates the feeling of someone translating rather than simply reacting. When an announcement plays, the genuine commuter's eyes move to the board immediately, automatically, even if they already know their platform. The operative might suppress this response, having already memorized the schedule. Or they might perform it deliberately, creating a gesture that looks like reaction but lacks the underlying reflex. What surveillance professionals understand is that observation in public spaces isn't about watching for suspicious actions. It's about identifying behavioral outliers through statistical deviation. Modern counterintelligence doesn't rely on a single observer having an intuitive sense that something is wrong. It relies on systems that track thousands of data points and identify anomalies. A person who enters a shopping mall and visits exactly 4 stores before leaving, spending between 3 and 5 minutes in each, never making a purchase, never stopping at a food court or restroom, creates a pattern that algorithms flag as inconsistent with consumer behavior. The operative thinks they're varying their routine, but they're varying it within parameters that themselves follow rules. A genuine shopper might spend 45 minutes in a single store trying on clothes they don't buy, then leave the mall entirely. Or they might visit 8 stores in rapid succession, purchase 1 item from the last store, then circle back to a store they already visited. The chaos of civilian behavior, its fundamental lack of efficiency and logic, becomes nearly impossible to replicate when every choice carries operational weight. The psychological pressure of potential observation creates a feedback loop that intensifies the very behaviors operatives are trying to suppress. There's a concept in surveillance detection called ambient awareness, the unconscious monitoring of one's environment that every human performs constantly. For most people, this awareness operates at a low level, noting potential threats or social cues without demanding conscious attention. For an intelligence officer in hostile territory, ambient awareness becomes heightened, sharpened, consuming mental resources that would otherwise maintain natural behavior. They become aware of being aware, and this metaconsciousness changes how they inhabit space. Their eyes might not obviously scan for threats, but they don't settle either. They don't get lost in thought, don't zone out waiting in line, don't experience the mental drift that characterizes normal public existence. This constant vigilant presence, even when perfectly controlled on the surface, creates an energy that trained observers recognize. The way people respond to accidental eye contact reveals more than almost any other micro-interaction. When strangers make brief eye contact in public, there's a universal response pattern: a quick acknowledgement, sometimes a polite smile, then an immediate break of contact, often accompanied by a slight turn of the head or redirection of attention. This response happens automatically, governed by social programming deeper than conscious thought. An intelligence officer who has been trained to assess everyone they encounter might hold that eye contact a fraction of a second longer, processing and categorizing the person before breaking away. Or they might break contact too quickly, having been taught not to engage. Either variation creates a ripple. The same principle applies to unexpected events. When someone drops something nearby, or a child cries, or a loud noise interrupts the ambient soundscape, genuine civilians turn toward the stimulus with unguarded curiosity or concern. Operatives might suppress this orienting response, maintaining their cover activity with unnatural focus, or they might perform the response artificially, turning to look, but without the full-body alignment that accompanies genuine surprise. Reflections in storefront windows and glass facades create surveillance opportunities that most people never consider. A civilian walking past a shop window might glance at their own reflection unconsciously, checking their appearance or simply registering their presence. An operative conducting counter-surveillance might use that same reflection to observe the street behind them, and that tactical use of reflection creates a different quality of attention. The eyes focus differently when looking through glass to observe something beyond, versus looking at the glass surface itself. The angle of the head, the duration of the glance, the timing of when it occurs in the walking rhythm. All of these elements combine to create a signature that differs from casual vanity or idle self-awareness. Multiple passes by the same reflective surface, even separated by significant time intervals, create a pattern of reflection checking that surveillance teams catalog and analyze. The mistake crystallizes most clearly in the relationship between action and context. Every public space has an expected emotional and behavioral texture. A park on a sunny afternoon carries a certain energy, a particular pace of movement, specific reasons for being present. People walk dogs, they read on benches, they play with children, they exercise, they eat lunch. Each activity comes with appropriate duration, body language, and engagement level. An intelligence officer using the park as a meeting location or surveillance position must select one of these cover activities, but the performance of that activity will be shaped by the fact that it is not the real reason they are there. They might sit on a bench with a book, but their page-turning rhythm might be irregular, or they might never actually look down at the book for more than a few seconds. They might walk a route through the park, but the route creates geometric efficiency rather than the wandering exploration of someone enjoying nature. The disconnect between stated purpose and actual behavior becomes visible to observers, who understand what authentic presence looks like in that specific context. Time creates patterns that are difficult to disguise. An operative who needs to maintain presence in an area for surveillance purposes might enter a cafe, order coffee, and remain for an hour. This duration isn't suspicious in itself. Many people spend hours in cafes working on laptops or reading. But the behavioral markers of someone genuinely engaged in an activity differ from someone maintaining a position. A real cafe customer might shift position regularly, get up to use the restroom, order a second drink, check their phone with the scattered attention of someone not focused on a task. The operative maintains their position with more consistency. Their attention may sweep the room in patterns rather than random glances. Their coffee might sit undrunk for long periods because drinking isn't the point. Even when they perform all the correct actions, the underlying intention shapes the quality of those actions in ways that create subtle but measurable differences. What makes the public space errors so devastating isn't its obviousness, but its inevitability. The human nervous system isn't designed to maintain perfect performance under sustained observation while executing complex tasks. Stress creates tells, and operational stress creates specific patterns of tells that counterintelligence professionals learn to recognize. An operative might successfully mask every conscious behavior, maintaining perfect cover throughout an operation. The hands might be steady, but they're consciously steadied rather than naturally relaxed. The breathing might be regulated, but regulated breathing follows different mechanics than unstressed breathing. The face might be composed, but composed faces lack the micro-expressions that flicker across relaxed faces in response to internal thoughts and external stimuli. The realization that settles over an intelligence officer who suspects they've been identified carries a particular quality of dread. There's no confirmation, no direct confrontation, just an accumulating sense that something has shifted in the operational environment. Perhaps they notice the same face in multiple locations, or they sense a pattern in how people position themselves in relation to their movements. The mistake, once made, cannot be unmade. The pattern is recorded, the behavioral signature is captured. The deviation from baseline civilian behavior is documented. What follows isn't immediate arrest or dramatic confrontation. What follows is continued observation, pattern analysis, network mapping. The operative becomes a thread that hostile intelligence can follow back to other threads, unraveling networks through patient collection and analysis. And the most unsettling aspect of this exposure is its silence. The surveillance that identifies you doesn't announce itself. The documentation of your mistake happens in review rooms and analysis centers you'll never see. The consequence may be building for weeks before the first tangible sign appears, and by then, the question isn't whether you've been compromised, but how much damage has already spread through the networks connected to your exposure. The moment of understanding doesn't arrive with clarity or certainty. It comes as a feeling, an instinct honed by years of operational work, a subtle wrongness in the texture of daily life. The usual contacts become slightly less available. Their response is delayed by hours instead of minutes. Meetings that were routine now require additional justification. Access that was seamless begins encountering friction, not enough to be definitive, but enough to create a pattern. The intelligence officer realizes they're being isolated, not through dramatic action, but through incremental adjustment. The machinery of counterintelligence doesn't announce detection. It simply begins the process of containment, limiting exposure while gathering additional information, constructing a complete picture before making any overt move. The operative continues their work, but now every action carries the weight of potential observation. Every communication might be the one that confirms suspicions. Every public appearance could be adding evidence to a case being built in silence. What makes this phase of exposure psychologically devastating is that normal life continues around the compromised officer. While their internal reality has transformed completely, they still go to cafes, still walk through parks, still navigate subway systems and shopping districts, but these spaces have changed. What was once operational terrain has become a trap. Every person might be surveillance. Every camera is certainly recording. Every pattern they established in their cover life now serves as a baseline against which deviations are measured. The challenge becomes maintaining the appearance of normalcy, while knowing that normalcy itself may be the behavior under scrutiny. They cannot suddenly change their routines without confirming that something has shifted. They cannot flee without triggering immediate action. They must continue performing the role of their cover identity with perfect consistency, knowing that each performance is potentially being analyzed for signs of stress, awareness, or preparation for exfiltration. The psychological pressure creates a collapse that happens without visible panic, a slow-motion disintegration of confidence and certainty. The operative begins second-guessing every decision, reviewing every interaction for mistakes, analyzing their own behavior for the tells they know surveillance teams look for. This hyper-awareness becomes its own liability, creating exactly the kind of behavioral changes that confirm suspicion. They might become more controlled, more careful, eliminating the casual inefficiencies that made their cover authentic, or they might overcompensate, forcing spontaneity and randomness that feels performed rather than genuine. Either way, the feedback loop tightens. The more they try to appear normal, the more conscious their performance becomes. And conscious performance is precisely what separates operatives from civilians. Exposure in the intelligence world rarely resembles the cinematic moments of handcuffs and interrogation rooms. Instead, it manifests as controlled erosion of access and influence. Meetings with assets are postponed indefinitely. Communications that once flowed freely begin encountering technical difficulties. The operative's diplomatic cover, if they have one, remains intact, but their actual operational capacity diminishes through administrative obstacles and bureaucratic delays. Hostile intelligence services understand that arresting a spy creates an international incident, triggers diplomatic retaliation, and ends the intelligence collection opportunity. Far more valuable is the compromised officer who doesn't know they're fully burned, who continues operating while everything they do is monitored, documented, and used to map networks, identify methods, and understand priorities. The spy becomes an intelligence source through the very act of trying to continue their mission. The myth of the dramatic capture. The confrontation in a dead drop or the arrest during a clandestine meeting obscures the more common reality of how intelligence careers end. Reputations are quietly destroyed through whisper campaigns and carefully placed doubts. An officer's reports begin receiving additional scrutiny from headquarters. Their assessments questioned, their operational proposals rejected without clear explanation. They're not accused directly, because accusation would require evidence and create a paper trail. Instead, they're simply marginalized, moved laterally into less sensitive positions, given assignments that keep them busy but isolated from critical information. Their access to classified material narrows. Their security clearances undergo unexpected reviews. Colleagues who once collaborated freely become distant, not hostile, but careful, as if proximity itself has become a professional risk. The operative realizes they're being boxed in, their identity and reputation slowly suffocated by institutional pressure that never announces itself as punishment. The public spaces where the initial mistake occurred now serve as sites of continuing exposure. The operative must still appear in restaurants for social obligations, still shop for groceries, still maintain the visible life of their cover identity. But these appearances have changed in nature. What was once protective coloration has become performance under observation. The cafe where they once met contacts becomes a location they must avoid or visit in exactly the same pattern as before, neither deviation safe. The shopping mall that provided cover for surveillance detection routes now represents potential evidence of pattern deviation if their behavior shifts. They're trapped by their own established baseline, unable to change without confirming suspicion, unable to continue without providing additional data for analysis. The mistake compounds itself, the initial behavioral deviation leading to awareness. Awareness leading to changed behavior confirming the original suspicion. This experience of controlled exposure extends beyond the classified world of intelligence operations. Modern public life increasingly operates under similar conditions of ambient surveillance and pattern analysis. Every person moving through urban environments generates data trails, behavioral patterns captured by security cameras, transaction records, cellular location history, social media activity. The mistake that exposes a spy, that subtle deviation from baseline civilian behavior, as parallels in how algorithms identify anomalies in consumer behavior, flag unusual travel patterns, or detect inconsistencies in digital identity. The difference is one of stakes and intention, but the mechanism is identical. Systems observe behavior, establish baselines, identify deviations, and trigger responses. The person being observed rarely knows when they've been flagged, rarely receives direct notification that their pattern has attracted attention. They simply experience the consequences: additional security screening at airports, targeted advertising that reveals uncomfortably accurate profiling, financial transactions that trigger fraud alerts, or job applications filtered by automated systems for reasons never made transparent. The intelligence officer trapped in the aftermath of their public mistake faces a choice. With no good options, they can attempt to continue operations, knowing that everything they do might be feeding information to hostile services. They can request extraction, which may or may not be approved, and which itself becomes a signal that confirms their compromise. Or they can simply wait, maintaining their cover life while understanding that the walls are closing incrementally, that each day brings them closer to some form of confrontation or exposure. They cannot predict or control. The psychological toll of this liminal state, neither fully operational nor definitively burned, neither rested nor free, creates a particular kind of stress that breaks operatives more effectively than interrogation or imprisonment. The uncertainty, the lack of clear resolution, the daily performance of normalcy while knowing that normalcy is exactly what's being monitored and analyzed. All of this compounds until the operational effectiveness they once possessed has been completely eroded by their own awareness of potential observation. The final phase of exposure often arrives without drama. A quiet meeting with a superior, A recall to headquarters for routine briefing that becomes permanent reassignment. A diplomatic posting that ends early due to unnamed concerns. The operative's career doesn't explode. It simply ends. The trajectory that once pointed toward advancement and influence redirected toward administrative roles and controlled retirement. The networks they built are rolled up or cut off. The operations they ran are reviewed and often terminated. Their years of work are evaluated for damage assessment, every success re-examined for potential compromise, every failure analyzed for signs that they were detected earlier than realized. And the public spaces where they made their mistake continue operating exactly as before. Crowds flowing through train stations and shopping districts, cafes filling and emptying, parks hosting the same cycling patterns of recreational use. Nothing has changed for the civilians who share those spaces. But for the intelligence officer, those environments represent the sites of professional death. The places where behavioral patterns that seemed invisible prove to be anything but. If you've made it this far, you understand something that most people never consider. The surveillance that matters isn't always visible to mistakes. That in careers happen in plain sight. And the line between blending in and standing out is thinner than training can fully account for. If this analysis of intelligence, tradecraft, and public exposure has given you a new lens on the world around you, like this video. If you want more examinations of the invisible architectures that shape modern life, subscribe to the channel. And if you have thoughts on whether true privacy exists anymore in public spaces, whether the behavioral analysis that catches spies is fundamentally different from the profiling that tracks consumers, share your perspective in the comments below. These questions aren't academic. They're the reality we all navigate every time we step into public view. In espionage, as in life, the mistake that gets you caught is rarely the dramatic moment of obvious failure. It's not the gunfight or the chase, not the discovered document or the broken code. It's the moment, barely noticeable even to yourself, when you stop blending in. When the performance of normalcy becomes just conscious enough, just controlled enough, just different enough from genuine civilian behavior that the pattern breaks. And in a world where everything is observed, recorded, and analyzed, the break is all it takes. The crowd moves on. The cameras keep recording. And somewhere, in rooms you'll never see, the analysis continues. The mistake has been made. The consequences are already in motion. And the only question left is how long until the silence ends.